Somebody cut the music. If you'd please rise to salute our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mayor Murphy?
Here.
Ms. Rosikowicz?
Here.
Ms. Scott?
Here.
Mr. Conway?
Here.
Mr. Gignac?
Here.
Mr. Leary?
Here.
Ms. Martin?
Here.
7 present.
Thank you. We're here tonight, of course, to discuss the FY 2014 budget. We have a presentation by the administration, and so at this point I'd turn it over, and then we'll take questions afterwards. Madam Superintendent.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This evening, we've come together just for the most current information. We want to clearly state what we know to date, and the information we have. If people have questions or would like any additional information within the next few days, we just want to make sure everything's clearly communicated here so we can move forward. And I'm going to ask Mr. Lang to do a basic overview of the budget and the numbers as they have happened right now. There hasn't been a great deal of change, but there are a few updates that he'd like to share. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lang.
Thank you. This will be brief. We met as the Finance Subcommittee a week ago, Monday night, and conveyed the recommended 2014 budget to the committee members that were present. We reviewed the different sections of the budget. We talked about some of the new formats and some of the supplemental information that was provided. I had a few inquiries during the week, so I followed up with some additional information on the budget. But not too much has changed since a week ago Monday. We're still kind of waiting on a final aid resolution, a local aid resolution, based on either some kind of a joint recommendation coming out of the House and the Senate, or the actual final fiscal 2014 budget to be settled, at which time the Department of Ed and the Department of Revenue will update cherry sheets and their foundation budget figures. I have still been working with the latest figures that we have. I was uncertain a week ago what the timeline for the city budget presentation was going to be, but City Manager Lynch actually last night laid out his 2014 budget recommendation for services, and within that, as I'd indicated a week ago, he'd included an additional $1 million worth of funding on top of any Chapter 78 increase for the school department. That still puts us in the predicament that we're about $2.5 million short of our level service budget, so that hasn't changed. And I continue to take a look at the different updated postings that come out from the DOE regarding the different levels of the budget, particularly some of the special grants that could be coming out, taking a look at the circuit breaker numbers and how that might affect us for some of the special ed tuition increases for next year that we talked about. But all in all, not too much has changed on that front. I just earlier this afternoon was able to download a copy of the city manager's proposed budget, and really over the next day or two we'll be going through that to figure out exactly how that recommendation will fall in line with the net school spending requirements, what that should do to our position for the current year, fiscal 13, that we'll be finishing, and then what kind of shape that will put us in for next year, 14. But at the present time, those variables are still very much in play. One of the things that I thought in talking to Superintendent and Mayor earlier today that might be helpful tonight is to basically go through any questions or concerns folks had about different sections of the budget. If they had questions and I can answer them here live, I certainly will. If not, I can follow up before the weekend with the additional information. And then possibly next course of action may be to give me the next couple of days to look through the city budget, continue having discussions with the city manager's office, the State House folks, to figure out exactly if we have a better indication of which number is going to prevail with regard to the state budget. And then next Wednesday, we have a regularly scheduled meeting. Possibly look to keep that agenda on the light side, and any reports or motions, if they can be moved to the meeting on June 19th, try to do that to allow us to have the regular meeting and then go into an actual budget hearing, where at that point in time, we would go page by page, as we usually do, through the budget and make our cuts and additions. The other thing that we will be doing in the next day or two as things become clearer with regard to the picture, we have been vetting all the different budget reducing scenarios that have come in from the schools and central office. So depending on what the outlook would be by the weekend, the superintendent and I would prepare a recommendation for next Wednesday's meeting. Try to get it to you Friday evening so you could have the weekend to review it. Next Monday, Tuesday to ask any follow-up questions if need be. And that would actually be the cuts, if we're in that scenario, that we would be taking a look at recommending for next Wednesday night. And again, I would order them as we usually do to correspond page by page as we go through the budget. And we can deliberate individually as we go through. So that would be my update. And unfortunately, not a lot of new news, but that's where we stand at this point.
Mr. Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a point of clarification. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to, I'm not sure if it would be the superintendent or Mr. Lang, but we have, it's a $2.5 million deficit at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, when we laid out the recommended budget from last year, we had talked about the level budget scenario. In that level level service scenario outlined at this point in time about a $2.5 million difference between what we anticipated for the revenue coming from Chapter 70 and the additional $1 million contribution from the city. Our gap at that point to just provide the level services that we're providing now was approximately $2.5 million.
The $2.5 million, is that with the with the city manager's additional $1 million or without it?
With it.
With the $1 million, we're still $2.5 million down.
Correct.
So in other words, we're basically $3.5 million down. Is that correct?
Well, 3.5 if the city didn't increase their contribution at all.
Correct. Okay. Well, the question: when did the city manager make this decision to perhaps give an additional $1 million?
I can't speak for him. I'm sure as they were putting through the budget deliberations.
In the last couple of weeks, maybe last month.
Yeah, the superintendent and I met with the manager and the CFO probably 2 weeks or so ago. And at that point in time, they were looking to give us at least $1 million more. I don't know what else factored into the equation during their review.
The question I have here is what's kind of confusing me, to be quite frank with you on this, is the going back when we were negotiating with our unions. I know that it was asked certainly by probably all of us on the committee to find out whether we could afford, whether we could afford the specific increases, and that at that particular time we apparently had the money. We were told we have the money, and now all of a sudden we find that we're $2.5 to $3.5 million down as a deficit. How do we rectify that? I mean, here again, during negotiations, we spent day after day, night after night going over these. And at that particular time, there was no alarm that went off to say, hey, by the way, we're $3.5 million down. Because I think that certainly our attitudes would be quite different approaching negotiations. I mean, I think that, I know, I'm only going to speak for myself, but it sounded like we were in fairly decent shape financially, and we weren't worried about the small percentage that we did give the unions. Now all of a sudden we give that small percentage, and it certainly seems that we were giving away money at that time that we couldn't afford to give it away. I mean, this is what I know people have said to me. These are the taxpayers. These are the people that are our bosses. Say, why would you be giving raises when now all of a sudden we're between $2.5 and $3.5 million down? It just doesn't add up, to be quite frank with you. I don't know where the ball was dropped here, but obviously there certainly is a concern, and I know, I'm only speaking for myself, but there was certainly a concern by the taxpayers. They're saying, I don't know why you guys did that. It would be irresponsible to do that, and I agree with them. I mean, I don't have a defense. That's the point I'm making here, too. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Martin?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Certainly having gone through this process with my colleagues many times, we all recognize that it's a difficult position to be in at this point, looking at this $2.5 million difference. I think one of the key things for myself is that certainly when we were in the budget, and rather in the negotiation process, and right up until about 4 weeks ago, the budget picture was very different. When the governor's budget was released, it was a very different number. I don't think any of us were expecting that to go through completely the way it was, but I don't think any of us, and I don't think anyone across the state really anticipated that we would see this kind of dramatic swing, excuse me, in the funding that we'd be looking to the state, to supply to our district based on the foundation budget. So I think that, in the years I've been doing this, I've never come to this point in the budget process without there being a deficit, without there being cuts that needed to be made. And that stretches back to when, 14 years ago, when the ed reform kind of had its final heyday, which was unfortunately my first year on the school committee when the cuts first started. And it's been a continuous situation ever since then. I think looking at this deficit is, it's once again calls upon this committee and the administration to work together very closely to ensure that the cuts we make are thoughtful, and that they're done with the district in mind and the best interests of our students and our families in mind. And I think that this committee has done that certainly every year, and I have no reason to doubt that we won't do that again this year. I will, however, counsel that these are shifting sands, and even looking at this number isn't a finite number. The state deliberations go on, and we really, without benefit of a crystal ball, can't say with any definitive nature what the final number will be. But I think, again, as we've done in the past, it calls for prudence in developing some tiered approaches and some priorities, so that as we come into a situation where we may have to make some cuts, we can do it, again, in a thoughtful and well-considered fashion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leary?
Thank you. I think the biggest surprise that came out, at least for me personally, was the cost of the special education rising by $800,000 positive plus. I mean, it's over $800,000. And then in addition to that, you're talking $700,000 plus cut in the circuit breaker, which we're looking at a $1.6 million deficit. That to me is the only part that, I mean, it always troubles you when you're sitting in a deficit, but for me, that's the most unexplained event. I mean, when did we know that this was going to occur? Obviously, Mr. Conway was presenting when we were going through the budget, we were going through negotiations, we were looking at the governor's budget, but also keeping somewhat a jaundiced eye that knowing it will come in lower than what he presented, but not to the point where we're at now. But the part that's, the part that we didn't even realize, I think, is that the combination of the two, the increases and the cuts, is a surprise. I don't know how you go about planning a budget, and this must be happening across the Commonwealth. I don't know how you go about planning a budget when you have an $800,000 increase in special ed, and then your funding drops by almost the equal amount. There's a serious disconnect between the two numbers. Tonight, I don't think we go through any line item by line item making cuts, but I do think two things have to happen. One, we need to sit down, the administration needs to sit down with the city administration and go over what we believe to be the net school spending numbers and what we believe to be the accurate amount that should be owed if we are going to 100% the schools. I've heard a lot of different numbers. What number I believe it to be, and I may be incorrect, is right around $2 million at this point. So if we are getting an additional $1 million, we're still $1 million shy of that. I don't know if that was presented that way last night. I don't know if the city administration is even cognizant of that number. I do know from reading the paper that he's willing to sit down with you because he's aware of the deficit and he's willing to try to figure out how do we reach this point. So I think we need to take that as a first step in terms of that part of it. The second part is we need to look at certain areas that we need to look at anyway. First, busing. What, if we do have to make cuts, where can we make savings in that area? And we need to look at that right now. So if we are going to make changes in that area and try not to lay off any personnel, that's an area where we may have some impact. It does have a dramatic effect, however, on our customers. But that needs to be looked at, so at least for me personally, I know we looked at it. Was there enough money to make a cut, or was it not of pertinent value to even look at? But we need to know that information. One more thing, the third thing we need to really take a look at too is looking at how we can utilize the grant monies to really save some positions if we need to have cuts. Being really creative with using that. I know that often I ask the question the same way, can we use some of the professional development monies to save personnel? And the response is always the same, no, we can't. But I think we need to take a more creative look at that. How do we redefine that? How do we take it and maybe we spend it more on paraprofessionals so we have more of a savings in terms of not paying a larger portion of it for pension costs? I don't know, but I think we need to be creative with it. Whatever we do in this budget this year, unfortunately, the following year, because of the charter school increases, which incidentally by the city manager's report is an increase this year of 8.6. I mean, they got an 8.6 increase, almost 9% increase from the state, that we're going to see this again and again. So we're going to need to really be more creative and innovative, pick your adjective. Otherwise, we're not going to be around much longer. Or we're going to be a school servicing folks and downsizing. That's already beginning to happen. I don't understand if there's an overall goal to eliminate, urban public schools. Perhaps there is. I've heard people jokingly say it. But the way the funding is being presented, either we evolve or have a lot of new people elected to the legislature to change what's going on, or we're not going to be here 10 years from now. Or what's left will be significantly different than what's here today. Thank you.
Mr. Lang.
Thanks. Just to respond to a couple of the different points that were brought up. Number one, with regard to the overall budget and the difficulty that we face, unfortunately, it's an annual difficulty for urban school systems, in particular ours. This is my 10th budget that I've worked on, and I think in the last 10 budgets, 2 of them were years that I came in and we were actually looking in the positive, that we actually knew we were going to have some money to reinvest in the school committee's priorities. Unfortunately, and again, when I came in 2003, it was like the last year that we actually saw some significant increases in the district. In my first 4 or 5 years, we were dealing with one budget deficit after another. We're looking at school closings, grade level reconfigurations. It has just been one kind of budget dilemma that we're working with one year after another. Our enrollment has been in flux. But unfortunately, that's going to be the situation that we're in for the next number of years. This isn't the budget situation that we're only looking at this year. The charter school opening is going to impact us. It's going to have, obviously, some of our student enrollment is going to be diverted to the charter school. Luckily for us, we've had an increase in student headcount in the last couple of years, and we can maintain our existing, the core of our existing program. One of the things I think that's just a kind of a misconception to the public is a charter school opening up and taking 75 kids per grade level. Some would look at that and say, well, that's great, you can close a school. You can do something to reduce your costs. But when you have 50 or 60 classrooms at each grade level across the district, 75 students being filtered out of 12 different elementary schools really just means that our class size is going to go down 1 to 1.5 kids per school, per grade level. It doesn't mean that we're going to be able to close a school. So if we have class size at the elementary grades right now of, say, an average of 25, 26, 75 kids coming out of a grade level only means that our class size drops to 24 to 25. It's not significant. We don't see the withdrawal in any one particular neighborhood. We don't see the withdrawal in any one particular school so that we can then go close a school. We're coming off of a number of years where now at the elementary level, we've seen a little bubble and a little uptick in our enrollments. so that our elementary enrollments are in the mid to high 20s in some situations, where you really want them to be ideally in the low to mid 20s. I think, if anything, looking at the charter school opening up, it's going to help us to reduce some of our class sizes and make them more manageable, but it doesn't really give us the opportunity for wholesale school closures or consolidation. You're only looking at a few kids per grade level really changing. So that's one of the dynamics at play. The other dynamic at play is that the city is basically instructed on how much money it needs to contribute to the charter school. Now, I don't fully understand the charter school formula, and I don't pretend to, but the way that the funding is actually given to the city, they receive an assessment and then they receive a reimbursement. And that reimbursement is phased out over a number of years. So this first year or two, we're still going to be receiving a good amount of Chapter 78, of which is provided. 89 to 90% of our budget comes from the state. They're funding 89 to 90% of our budget already. Quite honestly, there's not a lot of room for growth there. There's not a lot more we can get out of the state, so we really need to maximize what we're getting from the local community. I am concerned a year or 2 years from now, when the reimbursement to the city starts to go down, and then the city has to increase, they're already going to have the assessment. They really can't fool around with that figure on the charter schools. But on their cherry sheet, their revenue is going to go down. And that is going to, quite honestly, pit us against the charter school when it comes to fighting for that 10% of our budget that comes from the local community. That's something we have to be cautious of. It is very, very difficult for us when we rely on 89 to 90% of our budget coming from the state to make any long-term plans or commitments at all, whether they be programmatic or contractual, because year after year after year, if the governor's budget comes out in January, the House budget comes out at the end of February, the Senate budget comes out in April, you can't make budget decisions until the end of May, early June for that July 1st. We can plan and we can put a 5-year plan together on what we want to do, but if we're so reliant on the state for that aid to come in, there is nothing that we can do until early June of each given year to actually make decisions. We have to safeguard ourselves. We have to, unfortunately, as I indicated last time, contractually notice folks that there may be reductions, and we take all those precautions. When it comes to Mr. Conway's question regarding the contracts and the settlements, we do a very good job of managing the budget within the fiscal year that we have, and that's what we really have direct control over. We do not have control over future year revenue sources when 89 or 90% of those funding comes from the state. The year that we're in now, and when we settled our last contract, I think it was sometime, we pretty much came to a conclusion at the end of January, early February. The governor's budget at that point had just come out. Obviously, the picture was a little rosier on the school side as well as the city side with regard to increased unrestricted aid. We settled the contract in the context of, in the year that we're in, we had a set aside of funds to be able to negotiate and settle that contract, and we did so. We managed those funds well. We provided for the contractual increase in this current year, and even with that, I am still working through the current budget to develop a surplus that we could roll over at the end of the year to help fund some of that $2.5 million shortfall for next year. We do a very good job of managing our budget each year in the current fiscal year. What we didn't know in January, and we won't know next year, is what, technically, we'll have as revenue to support any contract increase going in. We took a look at surrounding towns. We took a look at what other communities were giving for raises. We took a look at what the city of Lowell was giving to raises to the municipal unions. And if you recall, we ended up with a contract that basically had a 2.5% cost in the first year, the current year, and a 2.5% cost in the second year. The city gave out contracts 2.5, 2.5, and they gave a third year at 2.5. The city doesn't know any better than we do what's going to happen with the revenue for 14 or for 15. You negotiate in good faith, you evaluate your proposals, you evaluate the competing interests at the time, and you settle a contract. We are never going to be in a situation where I can tell you now what's going to happen with our revenue in 2014 and 2015 or 16 in the future. What we can really settle contracts on and what we negotiate with is the money that we have in hand at any one time in any one particular fiscal year. And that's what we did. And I do think we do a very good job of managing that. But I didn't know in January what our revenue was going to be in July. The city manager didn't when he was negotiating contracts and awarding contracts for 14 and 15. It's something that we try to stay on. And again, it's just, I don't want to be repetitive, but it's in such flux until we actually get the actual budget, which isn't passed again until sometime in May or June. Those are just a few of the points I wanted to touch on, and as I indicated earlier, it's a good conversation to have. Unfortunately, it's a conversation we're going to be having for the years to come, and really, it's something I'm happy to answer any questions on.
Mr. Conway.
Just quickly, through you to the Madam Superintendent, when did we find out about the out-of-district increases? Do you know?
I believe the out-of-district was probably around April when we started looking at the first budgets that were coming in. Is that true, Mr. Lang, around April?
Yeah, I think the special ed costs themselves with regard to the increases, this is something that not only is an issue that we're addressing this year, but we're going to have to be mindful of in the future. And the special ed department has done a good job of putting some data together for us so that we can put a real report together on what our current, next year, and even projections for the future are. There are several issues that are impacting our out-of-district placements in particular. One of the ones that's very frustrating to me, and I know a lot of folks, is that if the ones that we don't have any control over. So if you have a student that lives in Andover, lives in Chelmsford, whatnot, lives in another community, and moves into Lowell, and already has an IEP, and already has an out-of-district placement, Lowell then becomes fiscally responsible for that child, and we basically pick up the tab for that out-of-district placement, and we don't have any say in the matter. So there's a certain number of kids that move into the district each year that we don't have control over, that we can't even budget for or guess. You know, what I try to do, and my kind of funding strategy, if you want to call it, is I generally try to set aside the fourth quarter reimbursement that we would receive from circuit breaker in any particular year and use that as the cushion for the following year's budget. So I don't put that into play when I'm doing my revenue scenarios, because as a school system, we don't have an extra $500,000, $750,000 to pay for these tuitions that we don't know about at the start of a year.
If we look back at the out-of-district increases over the last, let's say, the last 5 years, would they be increases each year? Would it be consistently going up?
It's consistently going up. I can't tell you off the top of my head how much each year. It's a consistent increase.
Well, I'd like to find out I would think that would be pretty easy, just to find out what the percentage increase would have been over the last 5 years.
Sure.
Because again, if I'm doing a budget, and if I take a look at, what happened in the past, obviously you can predict what's going to take place in the future for the most part. Not all the time, I understand that. There are obviously extenuating circumstances. But if you see that there's an increase of approximately 12% one year, 15%, 11%, 16%, you know that somewhere in the ballpark the following year it's going to go up 15%. Mm-hmm. And I just want to take a look at that for the last 5 years and see what type of increase. Or was the spike so dramatic this time? Mm-hmm. That's the key I want to take a look at, because if that's the case, then I think that as a municipality we have to let the state know and certainly lobby for this to an increase. Fine, we understand that, but if it's something that is completely out of the ordinary and all of a sudden I can certainly understand it's very difficult to plan for something that has been going up 10 or 12% each year for the last 5 years, and all of a sudden it goes up 40% to 45%. That's what I want to take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leary.
Just to echo on that, I mean, even if it is going up that way every year, this is something that we need to have addressed with not only the state, but the city, because it's something that's just not appropriate. I think part of the discussion we had in the last few meetings was that the reimbursement rates to some of these outside vendors that we send students to have went up 5%. I mean, in 1 year? Who gets a 5% increase in 1 year when you're dealing with the state? I mean, you're dealing with state agencies. How do you get a 5% increase unless you're with the military, I suppose? But 5%, that's a significant jump. The problem, I think, has been echoed here. We are dependent upon an outside source, the state, to provide revenue, which, frankly, they've done a pretty good job. I mean, they're funding 90% of our schools. They actually gave us an increase this year of $3 million. So you can't go at the state completely and say, you're not funding us properly. Frankly, they're giving us more. What we need to do is be creative. We're going to have to evolve. And that means doing things differently, which I don't think anybody really wants to do, because making those decisions are hard to do and they affect people. But absence of making those changes as we get into these second and third, fourth years, whoever's going to be on the committee at that time, if you don't make those changes, the effect is going to happen to you, and it won't be in a positive effect. Because the charter schools are here. They're not going to go away. They are going to drain financial resources from this public school. They already are draining financial resources. So either we have a massive change in the thought process with the state government, which I don't think is going to happen, then we need to evolve, or we will die, or be such a lack of function that the city of Lowell will suffer as well. I like to see the numbers that Mr. Conway pointed out. I think they're important, but I'm kind of surprised at the numbers of being 1.6 million. I thought the circuit breaker matched any type of increases. I think that's a disconnect. I don't think the folks that put this together really understand that. I think that's a dramatic effect. If we didn't have 1.6 million, then this would not be a major problem this year. But again, it's going to be problems going forward if we continue doing business as we do it normally, thinking that we're going to get an increase, we can simply just go forward with pay raises, thinking that we can do business as usual. It isn't going to work. Thank you.
Mr. Lang?
Just one thing, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I just want to clear up on the circuit breaker fund. We're not seeing I'm not anticipating a major decrease in circuit breaker funding next year. It's always based on a percentage we pay the first 4 times the statewide average, per pupil average in our district costs, and then we're reimbursed a percentage. The maximum percentage would be 75% of any costs over that. One of the compounding issues with our circuit breaker for this year is, obviously, we've had additional students during the current year that have gone to out-of-district placements, or they've been placed by either, they've come in from other municipalities, kind of trim move-ins, or they may have even been placed in an out-of-district placement by DSS, but the parents live in Lowell, so we're fiscally responsible. There's a number of different scenarios that are out of our control that add to our out-of-district tuition costs. The way the reimbursement works is we're actually reimbursed for any expenses that we incur this year, next year. But if we have students that move in over the course of the year, so let's say they came into the district in January, February, we know they're in out-of-district placements come July, but we're only going to receive partial reimbursement that first year because we're only able to claim the period of time that they're in Lowell from, say, February to June. We'll be able to recoup that full expense the year later in 15, but it's not going to help us in 14. The other factor, again, just because we've had to now pay these extra costs in this particular year, we don't have that fourth quarter cushion to be able to roll our circuit breaker spending to 14 to help us out. I would hope to develop that cushion, in 14 to be able to then roll it to 15 to help out with that budget. But it's an ongoing struggle that we have to deal with each particular year. But I don't want to have folks leave the meeting thinking, we're losing circuit breaker money. We're not. It's really just the amount that we've set aside.
Is it $1.6 million that we're losing this year? I mean, the way we're presenting it is important, but is it $1.6 million that we're in deficit because of special ed? Is that the right way to say it, or is there a different way to look at it?
No, the net effect on our budget is a $1.6 million increase in special ed costs. But it is a combination of about $800,000 of additional tuitions, but $700,000 or $800,000 of less available circuit breaker for 15, not that we're getting less.
So the way I'm presenting it is inaccurate, but the net effect is $1.6
The
million.
net effect is correct.
Okay.
Right.
Which is still somewhat of a surprise. If I could, Mayor, I'd just like to if I could make a motion at this time, that I make a motion that we ask the city administration with the mayor, sit down with the city administration and discuss the net school spending and what we can do before we sit down next Wednesday to go through our budget line item by line item. See if there's any possibilities of any increases or any ways they can work with us to achieve minimizing that gap. I make that as a form of a motion.
Motion by Mr. Leary, seconded by Mr. Gignac. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, so voted. Madam Superintendent?
just to confirm with them, for Mr. Leary's request, that there is already a scheduled meeting that we have coming up before. You're getting information on Friday, so the mayor, as well as Mr. Lang and I, and the city manager and the CFO have an already scheduled meeting, so we will have as current information as possible for you before you get any more additional data on Friday that we'll send.
Mr. Conway.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly, just a point of clarification. I certainly agree with my colleague when he talked about, the great job that the state has done in helping our schools and funding our schools. There's no doubt about that. The only point that I wanted to bring up on that was the fact that if there's a line item that is just so far out of proportion with increases, that's something that, again, we have to take a look at. And if it's the out-of-school district or special ed, whatever it may be, the fact is that we have to zero in on that and find out why is it that increase is so significant compared to the other line items. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cott.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lang. Could you quickly just give us a recap on the fiscal year 2013? It's actually page 2. I don't know if you want to see it, but the over/under for the local contribution for the prior year, and how that shortage came about, the $1.9 million from last year?
Point of order, can we have a motion on the floor? We just take a roll call or have a vote up or down, and then we can easily take other questions.
We had a motion,
So
and it
okay.
was just a yay or nay, and it passed. So we're all set there. Ms. Scott.
Sure. With regard to page 2, this was a chart that just took a look at the actual foundation enrollment that had come from the state, and it also just was based and predicated on the governor's budget when he did the foundation budget calculation. Now that number, I'm not going to dwell on, but we don't know if that's going to be the real foundation budget number or not. But when it comes to the required contribution of the Chapter 78 for fiscal year 11, and then say 12 in particular, when we closed last June 30th, we closed our books, the city closes theirs. We then have to file an end-of-the-year financial report with the DOE, and then there's an audit company that comes in and audits our report. When that was all said and done, as of June 30th, 2012, at the end of the last fiscal year, the city did not meet its net school spending obligation by about $70,000. Now, the DOE builds in safeguards, because obviously the minimum you want to spend is $100,000, 100%. But they allow a city to fund or to actually pay 95% without reaching any penalties. And anything that you spend under the 100% is added to your contribution the following year. They allow that, and what happened in this particular instance is, if you recall, we actually, one of our agreed-upon chargebacks is for, say, snow plowing and snow removal. Last winter, we really didn't have much snow. So the city had budgeted, X amount of dollars. When we fill out our report, we have to put in budgeted numbers. We didn't have a lot of snow, so they didn't come through with a lot of snow charges. So when we actually file the report, it's based on the actuals. So they spent less on snow than they had budgeted, and that's where it gets accounted for. The other savings that hadn't been accounted for was that was our first year of the Amoresco performance contracting, so our utility costs were lower than the prior year. So we had budgeted what we had spent. We always budget the prior year actuals for net school spending purposes for that particular year. So we budgeted the actual expenditures from 11 as the budget for 12. So when the expenditures on the heat and electricity came in lower, that also, then when you report the actuals, had the city spending less. So that $70,000 in the scheme of things is relatively insignificant. The $70,000 gets added to the city's contribution for the current year that we're in, 13. So when we fill out our end-of-the-year report, we have to provide what the city has appropriated through the city budget process, and then what the school committee has appropriated through the budget by fund code and accounting category. The DOE takes a look at that data and says, if you fully expend your budget that you're given, this is where you're going to come in as far as net school spending. So they're predicting that on June 30th, even if we fully expend our budget, we're going to be $1.9 million under net school spending. That we should have been spending $1.9 million more in the current year than we're currently spending, based on cash and service contributions from the city. So that number won't be certified until we actually close the books on June 30th, file our report in the fall, and then have it come out and be audited. We know it's going to be under at this point, and, there's very few reasons why it could actually go up. I don't see that happening. If anything, I think that $1.9 million could become bigger. It's not going to go down. So that $1.9 million would then be added to the required contribution for next year. But again, that's the number that we don't know yet. But we know, in layman's terms, we're about $2 million under the net school spending for the current year that we're in, if that helps.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lang. You mentioned somebody coming in to audit the books. Now, who comes in to audit the books?
The city has a private Powers and Sullivan. They're the group that does our audits.
So they come in and do the school department's books?
Yeah, the
or
city and the schools.
Both of them?
Yeah.
Okay. And how often do they come in?
Well, annually, every year for that. And then they come in every year also for grants and things like that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any further discussion, questions? Mr. Gignac?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since there's no real order here, I know the Senate came out with their budget last week, and we only have the Senate Ways and Means budget here. Do you have those figures? Because
They weren't updated on any listservs that I'm a part of yet. They just still posting the Senate Ways and Means number.
okay, so they haven't released that information. I don't know how we want to handle this, but I have some other questions if we want to just wait till the actual budget hearing or what. Okay, I'm just going to go for it. In the employee benefits portion, page 35, where the health insurance premiums, it actually decreased by a little under $1,000. However, I thought we were going to see a significant decrease while moving into the GIC, and it looks like it has barely decreased.
Okay, you know what's deceiving here is the you see on the bottom part of the page where it actually indicates the estimated cost of Lowell Public Schools health and dental.
Yep.
And in 12-13 it was 16.7, and then it went to 16.6 in 13. The column for 11-12, when I sorted, must have been omitted. Basically, the 12-126 is the amount of actual contribution from the local budget. But in fiscal 12, that was the year that we received $2 or $4.3 million worth of the Ed Jobs money.
Yeah.
And our health insurance cost was offset that year to Ed Jobs. So really that 12-1 is the local budget actual, but you'd have to take a look at the Ed Jobs number.
So it's really 17.
Yeah, so it's really higher because we did see about almost a $1.8 million decrease
Okay.
for the current year, 12-13. I'll rerun that page for you.
Yeah.
And I'll list the contributions down below in another column, just so you can see the savings.
Okay.
Because we did actually drop about $1.8 million, I think,
Right.
in the current year that we're in. And then basically we're level funded with no increase for the current year.
Sure. Okay. Another question. What was it? Are you going to prepare us the recommendations that the principals have? I thought we were going to get that tonight. That's what I thought this meeting was about. But apparently it's not. Are we going to get that this Friday?
Yeah, what our proposal would be is if we schedule the actual budget hearing to do the page by page for
Yeah.
next Wednesday, then we'll, in the next 2 days, continue to refine these numbers. We'll have that meeting with the manager to see, what, if anything, additionally could come from the city. And then based on where we feel the number is going to be at that point in time, Friday afternoon in a packet, we'll send you out the superintendent's recommended cuts that would
Okay.
be reviewed next Wednesday.
Can through you, Ms. Mayor, to the superintendent, can you make sure that we actually get those figures? Because there's been an issue with the agenda.net, and I haven't gotten the agenda until, a few hours before the meeting. So I'd like to get that on Friday. If it can't be sent electronically, can we receive it somehow? Because that's important. And this meeting was actually posted as a budget hearing, so I was prepared to go through it word for word, but apparently that's not going to happen tonight. So I can't stress enough how frustrated I am with waiting for figures and scenarios, because we met last week and we discussed this through the subcommittee, and we were told that we were going to get some more information this week. I understand that some of the cherry sheets haven't been released yet, but I was hoping to get the scenarios so we can have at least a week to look at them, and then now that's going to be limited to just a few days. So these are some pretty big decisions that we have to make, and personally, this is the first time I have to make any cuts. So this is something I want to look at very seriously. So if we can get that even earlier than Friday, that might be better. But it's just a little frustrating to hear that, everything's up in the air, because I don't know how the city manager can prepare his budget and seal it up, and we're nowhere near that, so.
Any further discussion? I'd entertain a motion to schedule the budget hearing for next Wednesday for the meeting at 7 o'clock, so that the public might be able to come in and weigh in if they like. So moved by Ms. Martin, seconded by Mr. Conway. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed? So voted. Again, that would be next Wednesday at 7 o'clock as part of our regularly scheduled meeting. Any further to add? Then I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved by Ms. Martin, seconded by Ms. Scott. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed? So voted. We stand adjourned.